to the flag of the United States of America.
A classroom ritual, a vow of loyalty and unity.
One nation, under God.
Black children, white children, side by side.
And justice for all.
Under the state constitution, all people have the right to a public elementary and secondary school education. It says no person shall be denied equal protection of law or be subjected to segregation or discrimination based on race. But increasingly, Connecticut's public school districts are becoming separated by race and wealth. 14 of the state's 166 school districts, mostly urban centers, centers of poverty, have 80% of the public school minorities. Where you go to school depends on where you live, and the wealthier, predominantly white suburbs are academically outscoring the poorer, predominantly black and Hispanic city schools by a substantial margin.
We are just as much curious about you guys as you guys are of us.
Ewan Lovelace is a product of the Hartford Public Schools. He graduated from Weaver High last year. Now a freshman at the University of Hartford, Ewan is one of the success stories.
And then you'll divide by a negative t.
He now comes back to his old high school to tutor those trying to follow his lead. Ewan remembers his exposure to suburban schools.
Now, only when we're playing football, then it really comes back to me that this is like an all-white school and we're an all-black school and stuff are going to happen, you know.
What's happening is school districts are becoming farther apart, racially, financially, and academically.
I argue that as long as you have one individual who is not achieving his or her potential because of where they're located, we're failing.
I think we need to go back and retrace our roots and talk about those issues. Do we have a responsibility to one another?
The debate in Connecticut goes back at least 160 years to the time of Prudence Crandall, a white educator prosecuted for opening a school in Canterbury for black women. The Crandall case was cited in the landmark 1954 U.S. Supreme Court decision Brown versus Board of Education, which expelled racial segregation from the public schools. But since then, here in Connecticut, whites have fled to either private schools or the suburbs. City schools are left with a minority majority and a diminishing tax base for support.
And that's a condition that I don't think we should tolerate in the state.
Vince Ferrandino, the incoming state education commissioner, considers this his highest priority.
If the schools in Bridgeport and in New Haven and in Hartford are not quality schools, and if we're not producing quality students coming out of those schools, then regardless of how well we educate the students in Simsbury or in Weston, those students will not benefit in that society because the society will be torn apart.
I'm sorry, I get carried away.
Dave Carter has been part of the action on this issue all of his life. The president of Eastern Connecticut State University co-chaired the Governor's Commission on Quality and Integrated Education.
I find it frightening that we're willing to spend more on maintaining vestiges of segregation and engage in acts of discrimination that are so costly, not to realize what we're losing.
Some trace the problem right here to the state capitol. Connecticut's Constitution empowers the General Assembly to design and implement a system of education. But even though lawmakers are the ultimate authority, there is a long tradition here in Connecticut of delegating responsibility for education to local communities. Now, the legislature is funding a small number of pilot programs aimed at integrated and quality education, but the political status quo remains much the same. And no broad-based action is being taken to close the financial and racial gaps between school districts.
There is nothing to prevent the legislature from tomorrow redrawing the educational boundaries so that all of a sudden you would have an educational system where the numbers were in fact more diverse.
But State Senator Kevin Sullivan, chair of the General Assembly's Education Committee, believes a remedy imposed by lawmakers would backfire, especially in the current political climate.
Our first priority right now as a legislature is to get Connecticut back on a sound financial footing publicly and to do everything we can to get the economy of this state back on a sound footing privately. If we can accomplish those two goals, then we have the luxury, the fiscal luxury, the public luxury, and the opportunity to deal with some issues that have been put on the back burner.
But others insist we cannot afford the luxury of waiting, that the disparity between urban and suburban education is teaching a very negative lesson.
It's a moral issue. In Connecticut, many of our schools, I assume most of them, public schools, have the Pledge of Allegiance. And at the end of the Pledge of Allegiance in Connecticut, it's with liberty and justice for the suburbs. So,
Liberty and justice for all.